He sat calmly under the blinding stage lights, eyes steady, voice unwavering. Millions were tuned in, expecting a polite conversation, maybe even a few laughs. But when Michael B. Jordan leaned in and said, "You promised my friend he wouldn't die," time froze. Elon Musk blinked once. Then again. And in that silence, the world heard everything. What happened next turned a global broadcast into a moral reckoning. Was it justice, or betrayal? What if the most powerful man on Earth couldn't answer a single question? The lights were too bright, even for someone used to fame. The charity event was being streamed live across 5 continents, translated into 32 languages, and simulcast to over 100 million viewers. It was called The Future Is Now, a global summit blending celebrity, philanthropy, and tech leadership. But no one tuned in expecting history. Michael B. Jordan adjusted his blazer as the host introduced him. Actor, producer, humanitarian. Beside him sat Elon Musk, introduced not with a title, but with a myth, the man trying to take us to Mars. At first, the tone was light. Michael complimented SpaceX's vision. Elon praised Michael's work on prison reform. The audience nodded. The teleprompters flowed. But something in Michael's eyes remained still, unreadable. As the segment turned to water scarcity in sub-Saharan Africa, Elon chuckled lightly, referencing those early kinks in past aid efforts. Michael's jaw tightened. The host made a joke, the audience laughed, but Michael didn't. Then came the moment that shattered the script. A pre-screened audience question appeared on the screen. "Mr. Musk, how do you respond to reports that your water initiative in Ethiopia failed, and that hundreds were left without clean access after funding was pulled?" Elon leaned forward, brushing it off. "Those reports are exaggerated. Look, sometimes we invest in innovation, and the locals just aren't ready for it. That's not on us." Michael exhaled, slow and sharp. Then he looked directly into the camera. "Tell that to Isaac," he said. The room fell silent. Elon's gaze sharpened. "Who's Isaac?" he asked. Michael didn't look at him. "He was my childhood friend. He volunteered for your pilot program. You flew him in, filmed him drinking your miracle water. He was your poster child." Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. 3 months later, he was dead. Contaminated groundwater. No follow-up. No response. Just a press release. Elon opened his mouth, but no sound came. The host tried to cut in, but the damage had been done. On social media, the name Isaac was already trending. What was meant to be a conversation about progress had become something else, a reckoning. The audience in the studio wasn't clapping anymore. Phones were raised. Faces were still. On screens across the world, viewers leaned forward. Something real was happening, unscripted and raw. Elon leaned back, visibly rattled, mumbling something about misinformation. Michael didn't flinch. "It's not misinformation when a mother has to bury her son," he said. And with that, the first crack split open a facade no one thought would break. Michael hadn't planned on saying Isaac's name. Not tonight. Not with the cameras rolling and the pressure to perform pressed against every breath. But names have power, and Isaac's name, once uttered, didn't echo in that studio alone. It stirred ghosts. Years before Michael became a global icon, before the movie deals and red carpets, he was just a kid from Newark, New Jersey, sharing half a sandwich with the boy who lived across the hall. Isaac wasn't famous, but he was unforgettable. The kind of kid who fixed broken bikes for free and stayed after school to walk the younger kids home. They were inseparable until Michael's breakout in Hollywood created space between them. Not distance out of ego, but survival. And yet, they stayed in touch. Late-night texts. Birthday calls. Then, one day, a message came that made Michael stop in the middle of a photo shoot. "Heard about this clean water tech. Musk is funding it. They want volunteers for the Ethiopia project. I think I can help people." There was a photo attached, Isaac grinning next to a cardboard sign that read, "Hope is just science you haven't seen yet." Michael remembered that line because it haunted him later. Isaac wasn't rich. He wasn't a scientist. But he had one thing that made him stand out, a belief that even the most flawed system could be part of the solution. So when the outreach team from one of Elon's humanitarian ventures invited him to participate, he didn't hesitate. Michael had tried to ask questions. What's the vetting process? Are they doing environmental assessments? Isaac had laughed, waving him off. Bro, this is Musk. He sends rockets into space. I'm pretty sure he can handle a water filter. Weeks passed. Then months. The social media campaign went live. Isaac was front and center, drinking clean water from a solar-powered filtration tank, surrounded by smiling kids and corporate volunteers in matching t-shirts. Michael saw the post during a press junket. It made him smile. But it also made him nervous. Something about it felt polished. Too polished. Then came the silence. Texts unanswered. Voicemails ignored. The next update Michael received wasn't from Isaac. It was a forwarded news article from an NGO fieldworker. Local volunteer dies after collapse of water station infrastructure in Oromia region. No name was listed. Just male, early 30s. Michael's hands went cold. He made calls. Sent emails. Finally, someone broke protocol. The local coordinator confirmed what he already feared. Contaminants had leaked into the groundwater. There were allegations of rushed installation, inadequate follow-up, and local municipalities never being properly briefed. Musk's foundation released a brief statement. We are saddened by the isolated incident involving one of our early volunteers. We remain committed to innovation for global good. That was it. One line. One isolated incident. Michael flew out for the funeral. It wasn't televised. There were no press photos. Just a folding chair, a sobbing mother, and a framed screenshot of Isaac's face on a promotional video, propped up beside the casket like a cruel joke. In the months that followed, Michael tried to keep quiet. He donated in Isaac's name. He funded medical aid in the region. He commissioned a private investigation into the incident, but most doors were already shut, sealed with NDAs and legal walls higher than any of Musk's rockets. Whistleblowers hinted at corners being cut, technology that wasn't field-tested in local conditions, and a board of advisors more interested in optics than outcomes. But no one would go on record. Michael contemplated going public then, but agents and producers warned him. You'll look like another celebrity picking a fight with a billionaire. You'll lose the narrative. You'll lose your platform. So he waited. Waited for a moment where the silence would become betrayal. And tonight, that moment came. What the world didn't know as they watched the live exchange was that Michael didn't just speak for Isaac, he spoke for dozens of others whose stories had been buried beneath Musk's towering PR machine. Behind every flashy keynote and utopian Twitter thread, there were broken systems, unanswered letters, and grieving families told to sign settlements in exchange for silence. Michael had spent the past year collecting evidence, not to destroy Musk's empire, but to give voice to those who never made it to the spotlight. He wasn't a whistleblower. He wasn't a politician. He was just a man who had once promised his best friend, if anything ever happens to you, I'll make sure they know your name. And now the world did. The weight behind Michael's words wasn't fame or fury, it was the unbearable gravity of a promise kept too late. And when he stared into that camera, daring the world to blink, it wasn't for applause or applause breaks. It was for Isaac. For every buried truth. For every life that didn't trend but still mattered. The silence that followed his statement wasn't awkward. It was sacred. It was the hush that follows truth when there's nothing left to hide behind. The charity summit was never designed to accommodate confrontation. It was meant to be seamless, glossy, a parade of optimism powered by billionaires and celebrities aligning on a mission to heal the world with technology. Producers backstage shuffled between monitors, heads bent over cue sheets, nerves held together by wireless earpieces. When Michael B. Jordan went off script, jaws dropped, but the control room hesitated. Cut away. Mute the feed. The host's smile flickered as he tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, suggesting they celebrate the partnerships making real change. But Michael wasn't smiling. He was staring directly at Elon Musk, the man beside him, the man who built himself into a myth, a tech messiah with a spaceship in one hand and global salvation in the other. Musk's face tightened ever so slightly, And then he laughed, casually, as if the mention of Isaac was nothing more than a tangent. "I'm not familiar with that case," he said. "Sounds like you've been reading the wrong headlines, Mike." That one sentence unraveled years of public perception in real time. 100 million people watched as Michael slowly turned his head toward Musk and said, "No. I was reading his autopsy." The words rang out like a gunshot. For a split second, even the lights seemed to flicker. Michael reached beneath the sleek desk and placed a single manila folder on the table. The camera zoomed in before any producer could stop it. It wasn't flashy, just a name written in black ink, Isaac Mwangi. Michael didn't open it. He didn't need to. "There's more in here than most people would believe," he said, voice steady. "Emails. Contracts. Test results. But what really matters is what your team promised. And what they didn't do." Elon Musk shifted in his seat. "Look, I can't speak to every project. There are thousands. Sometimes implementation on the ground." Michael cut him off. He wasn't a project. He was a person. For a man trained in interviews, Elon was floundering now. The trademark smirk was gone. The controlled cadence had faltered. His rebuttals grew defensive, then dismissive, shifting blame to local governments, faulty data, even Isaac himself. "There are always risks when deploying new tech in underdeveloped regions. Volunteers are informed. That's the nature of progress," he said, this time into the camera, clearly hoping to restore control. But Michael leaned forward and dropped another match into the dry grass. "Then why were those risk documents never signed? Why do I have proof your foundation bypassed standard regulatory review?" The audience inside the auditorium sat frozen. Phones that had once recorded out of admiration now recorded out of awe and disbelief. The host tried again, nervously chuckling. "Let's pivot to," but Michael wasn't done. "Do you remember the slogan your team used in the campaign?" he asked Musk. "Technology for the forgotten. That's what you called it." Isaac believed that. "He thought you saw him." Michael's voice trembled for the first time, not from fear, but from fury held too long. "But you only needed him until the cameras stopped rolling. Then he was forgotten." At this point, the control room couldn't hide what was happening. Major networks had picked up the clip. Live viewership exploded. Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube lit up with millions of reposts under a single word, unscripted. But it wasn't just the audience reacting. Off-camera, a shift had begun among those who worked behind the scenes. An assistant producer slipped a message to the stage director. An anonymous file upload had just been received through the summit's internal server. "Nur Zinda Name." Just a file labeled "Do Not Ignore." Inside, an entire cache of internal communications from one of Musk's humanitarian tech subsidiaries. The emails detailed rushed rollouts, corners cut, warnings ignored. The timestamp on one message was damning. 2 weeks before Isaac's death, a senior engineer had flagged the project as unstable. The email had been marked low priority. Michael didn't know about the file yet, but the universe seemed to be echoing him in real time. Back on stage, Musk tried to pivot. "You can't expect perfection in a world that's broken. We're trying to help. I've put billions into." Michael didn't flinch. "Sometimes help feels like harm when no one comes back to check." The air in the studio was suffocating with tension. In homes across the world, viewers argued in real time. Some called Michael reckless, accusing him of weaponizing grief. Others hailed him as a truth-teller with nothing to gain. Sponsors panicked. The summit's official hashtag was buried under waves of new ones. #Justice for Isaac, #Tech Accountability, #Elon Exposed. And yet, in that moment, Michael wasn't thinking about hashtags or public opinion. He was thinking about Isaac's mother, who once told him that her son had believed the world would listen if the right person spoke. And Michael had waited for someone else to be that person, until he realized no one was coming. So he became the voice, even if it meant being hated. Especially if it meant being heard. The summit was no longer a celebration. It was a battlefield. And for once, the most powerful man in the room wasn't the one holding the mic. As the stage lights cast elongated shadows across the studio floor, the quiet no longer signaled confusion. It was reverence, the kind usually reserved for funerals or courtrooms. Michael B. Jordan sat with his shoulders squared, not out of pride but purpose, while Elon Musk fidgeted for the first time, tugging at his blazer as though it might somehow armor him from the truths circling the room. On television, the footage replayed in real-time delay, looped and analyzed with every breath Michael had taken and every blink Musk had missed. But the air in the studio had changed into something thicker, almost visible. The crowd, once amused and entertained, now resembled a jury. No claps, no laughs, just the weight of revelation pressing down on every heart and camera lens. The studio team had lost control. The host sat frozen, a puppet with its strings cut, while whispers erupted offstage. PR managers from Musk's team scrambled with phones to ears, but every attempt to halt the storm was too late. Journalists in the press gallery opened laptops with the hunger of wolves scenting blood. Meanwhile, Michael kept his voice low but resolute, like a man who'd rehearsed the truth so long in silence that now, unleashed, it could no longer be softened. "Your team settled with 3 families," he said, glancing at the audience. "One was threatened with deportation if they didn't sign. One lost 2 children. One begged for access to clean water again, even after the death. They were ignored." Musk's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing in that micro-expression his investors knew all too well, a man calculating, not feeling. "You're conflating events," he muttered. "We've launched thousands of successful installations. Some failures are inevitable. It's tragic, but you're politicizing this." Michael blinked once, slowly, and reached for the folder again. This time, he pulled out a page and laid it flat. It was a consent form, blank. Not a single initial. "This is the waiver Isaac never signed," he said. "Your system ran pilot programs in villages without informing the communities of the risks. No translators. No contingency plans. Just hope and tech, and hope died." Musk opened his mouth, but Michael didn't wait. "You keep telling people you're saving the world. But you only save the parts that look good in headlines. What about the rest?" His words landed like punches wrapped in velvet, gentle in tone, deadly in impact. And across the globe, people who had once defended Musk now watched with an unease they couldn't name. The internet exploded. Commentators from every corner of the spectrum weighed in. Activists resurfaced old lawsuits, some still pending, against Musk's various initiatives in underserved countries. Videos emerged, testimonies from local villagers, medical volunteers, even former engineers who had walked away when safety was compromised. One video, grainy but clear, showed a makeshift hospital flooded with contaminated water, a Musk-branded container leaking in the background. The caption read, "Hope shouldn't hurt." Meanwhile, Musk's defenders tried to flip the narrative, pointing to his record. Solar programs, battery systems, school grants, missions to Mars. But something had cracked. The moral calculus was changing. For years, Elon had been untouchable. Now, the questions weren't just about one failed water system, they were about the pattern. On stage, Musk tried one final tactic, empathy. He turned toward Michael, voice suddenly softer, leaning into his role as a visionary. "Look, I didn't know about your friend, and I'm sorry. But do you think attacking me on live television really helps anyone? You're a role model. What kind of example are you setting?" The silence that followed wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. Michael turned fully toward him, not with anger, but disappointment. The kind that says truth matters more than comfort. Especially when comfort comes at someone else's cost. And then came the line that would headline every article for the next week. "You're not being attacked. You're being held accountable. If that feels like an attack, maybe you've forgotten what accountability looks like." Even Musk's silence couldn't hide what the world now saw, his hands clenching, the furrow in his brow, the faint tremor of someone realizing that charisma couldn't drown out consequences forever. He had built empires on audacity, on bold moves and risk. But tonight, for the first time, boldness belonged to someone else. The moral center had shifted. Michael wasn't asking for vengeance. He was demanding reckoning. In a world addicted to spectacle, he had turned a celebrity panel into a crucible of truth. And inside that crucible, the world began to recalibrate. Because if even Elon Musk could be questioned, then maybe no one was above scrutiny. Maybe, just maybe, we were remembering that progress isn't defined by rockets or algorithms, but by responsibility. In a war of words, timing is everything. And just when it seemed like the summit had reached its climax, when the emotional weight of Michael's confrontation had finally silenced even the most cynical corners of the internet, something unexpected happened. Something no one on stage could control. A flicker on the teleprompter. A technician whispering frantically into a producer's earpiece. Then, mid-sentence, the feed stuttered, not enough to cut out, just enough for viewers to notice. A brief static blur washed across the screens of millions before the image stabilized again, and when it did, the camera panned wide enough to capture the moment a staff member slipped a thin black tablet to Michael. No one in the audience understood what they were seeing. But Elon did. His entire body froze, not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to betray the flicker of recognition in his eyes. The kind of recognition that doesn't come from surprise, but from fear. Michael didn't speak right away. He tapped the screen twice, then held it at arm's length for the camera to capture. A file was open. The title alone was enough to ignite a digital firestorm. Water Genesis Internal Audit, Confidential. It wasn't just a list of names and numbers. It was the autopsy of a cover-up. Leaked emails between executives. Budget reallocation memos. Legal advisories labeled "Do Not Forward." And worst of all, a highlighted message from Musk's own office, dated 3 months before Isaac's death. If the pilot fails, distance the foundation. Spin as government mismanagement. Do not issue public apology. Michael read it aloud. Word for word. Sentence by sentence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence on stage was volcanic. Not even the host dared interrupt. It turned out that while the public had only known about the Clean Water Initiative success stories, glossy promotional videos, smiling children, futuristic tech installations, behind the scenes, engineers had raised repeated alarms. Prototype systems were deployed without full testing, local regulations were ignored, and more than one regional partner had warned the foundation of contamination risks. But those reports were buried beneath PR spin and investor pressure. Water Genesis, one of Musk's flagship philanthropic ventures, had quietly dissolved its international field operations less than a year later, citing shifting priorities. What they didn't mention was the class action lawsuit quietly settled out of court, the payouts to grieving families bound by ironclad NDAs, or the whistleblowers whose careers were effectively erased. Michael's tablet buzzed again. A second file appeared, video footage. This time, it wasn't a promo. It was a grainy recording from a bodycam worn by an on-site safety inspector. The footage showed a faulty filtration unit leaking brown water into a stream used by villagers. The timestamp placed it just 5 days before Isaac's death. Michael didn't need to show the entire clip. He paused it on the moment the inspector says, off camera, "They told us to shut up and smile for the drones." That quote became immortalized within the hour. Hashtags erupted like wildfire. #shut up and smile. #the water lie. #Michael was right. For a man known for commanding narratives, Elon Musk had finally encountered a narrative he couldn't edit in post-production. When Elon finally spoke, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even denial. It was worse. It was evasion. "These are complex systems," he said, almost mechanically. "There are always factors beyond our control. Sabotage, bad actors. This isn't evidence of malice, it's the cost of trying to change the world." But this time, the audience didn't buy it. The applause that once followed his name had curdled into silence. Even the host, previously caught between diplomacy and panic, closed his notebook and set it down with an audible sigh, as if finally recognizing that neutrality was no longer possible. Michael leaned forward, his voice now calm, almost heartbreakingly so. "You said changing the world means accepting risk. But you never took the risk, Elon. Isaac did. The people you use for your campaigns do. You get the credit. They get forgotten. And when they die, you don't even say their names." He placed the tablet down. "Say his name." The silence that followed was unbearable. Elon stared at the floor. He didn't speak. Not even a whisper. Somewhere backstage, a producer finally cut to commercial, but it was too late. The feed had already gone global. News anchors abandoned teleprompters and broke into unscripted commentary. Analysts compared the moment to the fall of political empires, to whistleblower reckonings, to cultural shifts that no PR team could spin away. The hidden file had changed everything. Michael hadn't just confronted Elon Musk, he had dismantled the mythology around him, brick by gilded brick, using nothing but facts and the one thing the world forgot he had, the receipts. The aftermath would stretch far beyond the summit stage. Stocks would dip. Shareholders would panic. Elon's defenders would go to war online. But none of that mattered in the room. Because in that moment, truth had cut through noise like a blade. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. When the broadcast abruptly faded to black, the silence didn't feel like an ending, it felt like an awakening. Viewers stared at dark screens, unsure if they had just witnessed a technical glitch or the collapse of something larger. An empire, a myth, a carefully curated persona. The summit's final panel never aired. Sponsors scrambled to issue statements of neutrality. The network issued a placeholder, "We are experiencing technical difficulties." But the world wasn't fooled. Within minutes, major media outlets ran headlines that read more like battle reports than entertainment summaries. Michael B. Jordan shocks the world live on air. Elon Musk silent after data leak. Truth hits harder than rockets. But beyond the flashbulbs and viral headlines, the real aftershock unfolded quietly. On doorsteps, in inboxes, in boardrooms, and back channels that had long remained protected by wealth and perception. Michael didn't stick around for the after-party. There was none. The backstage hallways once meant for photo ops and champagne toasts became quiet corridors of uneasy glances and frantic whispering. Elon was escorted out a side door, flanked by security and his closest advisors, some of whom were already drafting statements that began with words like context, misinformation, and regret. He didn't speak to the press that night. In fact, he wouldn't be seen publicly for over a week. His silence, once interpreted as mystery or strategic brilliance, now reeked of guilt. But even then, Michael wasn't celebrating. He walked out of the building alone, the folder under his arm, no smile on his face. There were no reporters waiting at the curb. Just a cold wind, the hum of traffic, and the echo of a promise kept in the most public way possible. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded with surgical precision. The leaked documents were verified by multiple independent firms. Legal analysts broke down clause after clause of evidence pointing to systemic negligence. Human rights organizations called for investigations not just into water genesis, but into every philanthropic venture linked to Musk's global aid initiatives. Whistleblowers, previously silenced by fear or contracts, found courage in Michael's act. One by one, they came forward, engineers, field workers, project managers. Each carried a story. Each confirmed what the world now feared was true. This wasn't a one-off failure. It was a pattern, one cloaked in innovation, built on plausible deniability, and sold to the world as hope. But not all responses were supportive. Social media split down predictable lines. Some painted Michael as a self-righteous celebrity who had ambushed a good man trying to change the world. Others accused him of using tragedy to elevate his brand. Commentators argued on cable news with veins bulging in their necks. "What does an actor know about global logistics?" one pundit shouted. But that was the point, wasn't it? Michael hadn't claimed to be an expert. He had spoken not from a podium of superiority, but from a place of loss, a place most people understood better than they liked to admit. And for every detractor, there were 10 quiet messages sent to his inbox. "Thank you. You said what we couldn't." You reminded them we're not props. Behind closed doors, Elon faced a reckoning no technology could automate. Investors held emergency meetings. Board members demanded accountability. At least one government body opened an inquiry into the misuse of international development funds. The golden sheen around Musk dulled. And in the vacuum of his silence, something else rose, not noise, but reflection. For years, the public had been conditioned to worship innovation without questioning its ethics, to equate wealth with wisdom, and to assume that anyone who could build a rocket must also understand humanity. Michael's confrontation didn't just disrupt that, it dismantled it, piece by piece, by forcing a mirror into the face of progress and asking, at what cost? Michael never gave another interview about the summit. When asked by reporters days later if he planned to capitalize on the moment, his answer was simple: no. This was never about me. Instead, he quietly set up a fund in Isaac's name, designed to provide clean water access through grassroots engineering teams led by local communities. No global branding. No corporate sponsors. Just impact. Just people. The fund's slogan: hope shouldn't hurt. Within a month, over 200,000 people had donated. And yet, not everything could be wrapped in justice. Isaac was still gone. Other names buried in redacted reports would never be spoken aloud. Lives had been lost not in the shadows of war or disaster, but in the name of innovation. And that truth didn't sit easily, even with those who had supported Michael. Because the real revelation wasn't in the file or the confrontation, it was in the realization that we had all played a part. By looking away. By celebrating too quickly. By allowing brilliance to excuse brokenness. In the final analysis, Michael's actions were less of a takedown and more of a reminder that even in an age of spectacle, where everything can be framed, filtered, and monetized, integrity still matters. That speaking up may not change the past, but it can shape what comes next. And that sometimes, the most radical thing a person can do is tell the truth in front of people who would rather pretend.